Hello everyone, and welcome to this second video all about the spiritual essence of freedom and what it means to be free, spiritually free. So we are in the Carnelian ray of freedom right now and working with the divine archetypes of the midwife and the warrior, as well as the shadow archetype of the prisoner. If you haven't seen the previous video all about freedom, please check that out. So today we're going to talk about the relationship between freedom and the fear of death. The fear of death. So one of the things that our ancient predecessors and ancestors and teachers taught us is that our fear of death is actually the thing that comes in between our experience of freedom. It blocks us from truly experiencing life as a spiritually free and fully awake human being. So at some point along our life's path, if we are living and leading a soul-led life, we must confront our fear of death. Now, we have stories from some of the ancients, I'm thinking specifically in ancient Egypt, where spiritual initiates would actually put themselves within a sarcophagus, a tomb made of stone, cover it, and would in essence simulate the experience of death. Except this simulation wasn't even really a simulation. It was so close to the experience of death that some initiates didn't come through it alive. And so it really was a test. Now, what would happen in this tomb when you are closed off from light, from oxygen, with just barely enough to survive, is that it would fully awaken that deep fear of death within you. And one would either hit that fear of death and go into full-on panic and thus use all the oxygen available to them in the allotted amount of time they're meant to be in there, or one would surrender and enter into such a deep state of meditation that their breathing would slow down and their heartbeat would slow down, so much so that they wouldn't need hardly any oxygen to maintain that state. And thus they would come out passing the test. Some of the initiates had near-death experiences where they would cross over and come back. And that definitely relates to us nowadays, as many people who discover a soul-led life now have had near-death experiences. So we nowadays wouldn't want to put ourselves through these kinds of torturous and I would even say trauma-inducing tests, right? But when we live a soul-led life, our soul will inevitably lead us into some sort of initiation where we stare death in the face, where we are asked to surrender our ego's control over our life. So our ego is one of the primary jobs of our ego is survival and to keep us alive. And so this fear of death is built into us on an instinctual level. And so we, as human beings, we must learn how to come into a healthy relationship with this fear. And this is about initiating ourselves and our egos into being able to surrender control to our souls. And the only way our ego is going to do that is if our soul shows us in some way that life is eternal, that we are eternal, that we do not end when we die. Our souls are eternal. and will be reborn. So how do we experience that nowadays? A lot of different ways, and I'm sure many of you watching have experienced this already. Perhaps you have had a near-death experience where you crossed over and either your soul, your highest self, or one of your spiritual guides sent you back and said, you're not done yet. You're not done with this life. It could also be for many of us having very intimate experiences with loved ones passing over. Maybe we actually witnessed their passing and saw from a mystical perspective and felt from a mystical perspective what was really happening. Or maybe after their passing, we had intimate visitations from them. We could feel their presence still with us. We might also come into an intimate initiation with death during a dark night of the soul, when perhaps we were in such a state of despair that we contemplated ending our own life. And being that close to death, our soul spoke up and said, you're not done yet. And it transformed our relationship thus to death and endings and new beginnings, because we, in that moment, were reborn again. An intimate initiation with death, however, can also look a few different ways. We can be initiated through really challenging life transitions. When our life changes drastically and dramatically, and we lose so many of the comforts that we learn to rely upon, and we might have struggled and fought against those changes, but nothing we could do could stop them. And so eventually we knew that the only thing to do was surrender to a greater good and a higher power. And when we surrendered, we realized that we were okay and that we would be okay. That is another form of death. We live many spiritual lives in one human life. And so really this is about the ego dying, not about our physical bodies dying. And some of us will be initiated through our fear of death by witnessing either our own physical body or the physical bodies of our loved ones crossing over, but sometimes it is more about our ego's death and a huge, huge shift and loss of our identity in this world. So I leave you with all of this to contemplate for yourself. What types of death have you experienced in your life? How have they revealed to you that there is life beyond death? And if you haven't yet experienced this, do you feel open to it? Do you feel ready for it? I mean, I don't think any of us would say we're ever ready, right? Are you willing to surrender life as you know it now? Are you willing to die to one life in order to be shown that there is another life after this one? Only when we do this does our ego become flexible enough, put at ease enough, that it allows the ego to surrender control to the soul to lead us through life. Our ego loosens its grip, and this is when we truly then are able to begin living a soul-led life. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.